God's word is recorded in the 25th chapter of St. Matthew. Jesus said, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. And the king will then say to those at his right hand,
'Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me.'
Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you as a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? When was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?' And then the king will answer them,
'Truly, I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me.'
Then the king will say to those at his left hand,
'You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.'
Then they will answer, 'Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry,
or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not take care of you?'
And then he will answer them,
'Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.'
These will go away into the eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." This is God's story.
Our story. Thanks be to God.
On this final Sunday before Holy Week, in our last one of Jesus' stories that kind of cause us to step back and say, did Jesus really say that? The story is the final one that Jesus tells himself before Holy Week begins. And it's in the 25th chapter of Matthew. We'll turn the page next Sunday and Holy Week begins. What is the story that Jesus told just prior to that? Well, it's appropriately of the end of time. It's the end of the age, and having instructed them that he would return, Jesus paints a picture of what that day will be like. And it's Judgment Day at the end of the age. Well, the story that Jesus tells about Judgment Day, it might help if we can picture the court system in Jesus' day. And it might be different than what we imagine the courts to be based on our experience of a courtroom. Or maybe not. We've all kind of seen how programs like Judge Judy and Judge Joe Brown, and I think there's a lot of other permutations that are going on now that make it popular that you bring your complaint before one judge who pronounces over the day. Of course, Judge Judy and Judge Joe Brown are dealing with something that must be like small claims court. And the courtroom that Jesus describes is the end of time, the end of age, Judgment Day. We might expect with such high stakes that there would be a judge and a jury, and that there would be a counsel for the prosecution and a counsel for the defense, and the arguments would be presented to the jury who would deliberate. But the court in Jesus' day was just exactly the picture of one magistrate or one regional governor who would pronounce not only over small claims, but over life and death itself. In the courtroom in Jesus' day, this governor or magistrate would sit on a throne and make decisions about life and death. See, that's the picture that Jesus paints of Judgment Day, when he says, on that day it will be as the king sitting on the throne. But in this scene of Judgment Day, it's not some government official, but it's the Son of Man himself. It's Jesus himself sitting on the throne. And it's not an individual standing before him, but it's the nations of the world who come and stand before Judge Jesus. I don't know if that helps at all. That didn't really help me a lot. But anyway, it's really not a sober enough picture, but it at least gives us the image of Jesus in the courtroom and the nations of the world standing before him. And life and death and eternity is in the balance. Now we realize that as Jesus paints this picture of Judgment Day, that we may have been living with a couple of mistaken assumptions about what it's going to be like on that day. I know growing up in the church that I imagined Judgment Day. And I had some assumptions which I can see were mistaken based on how Jesus says it's going to be. Remember growing up, I'd think about death and dying and wondering what it'll be like on that day. I wonder if you've had these thoughts. Wonder what you've assumed is going to be in the balance. I always thought that we would be judged on if we believed correctly. And that was a really big stumbling block for me coming up in the church. I always thought, first of all, that I needed to have a strong enough belief in things like the virgin birth, or whether a guy really survived 3 days in the belly of a whale, whether someone could really rise from the dead. And I thought that eternity depended on my ability to have strong faith and believe things that were intellectually and rationally difficult to understand. But I thought that I would be judged on whether I had enough belief in all these things. Or I thought I would be judged on whether I believed correctly, which in the narrow little Scandinavian community where I grew up meant you better believe like a Lutheran and not a Catholic. I don't know if you've ever been exposed to such narrow thinking in this world, but I thought you had to believe correctly. And, maybe it's changed, but today we can get into our own doctrinal fixations. And, the ones that we better not believe like are those followers of Islam or some other religion, because the issue, we assume, is on that day, did we believe correctly? It appears, based on what Jesus said is going to be going on Judgment Day, that it's not the issue. Jesus says nothing about sitting on the throne and giving a quiz and say, did you get the right answers? Did you believe correctly? Did you believe strongly enough? That's not the issue. It has something to do with sheep and goats. Secondly, we may have assumed that on Judgment Day we'll be judged on if we have done enough. Specifically, we want to substantiate whether we are a sheep or a goat. And the question we ask is, have I qualified? Because throughout life, on this planet, we have needed to measure up. We've needed to score highly enough. We needed to get a favorable enough performance review, good enough grades. All these things are important, and so therefore, we imagine that on Judgment Day, we better prepare ourselves and our resume. That, as a matter of fact, I did visit some sick people. Check. And I put a little bit in the Salvation Army kettle. And I wrote somebody who was in prison a letter. Check, check, check. But notice that Jesus says on that day, and this unlocks the key, by the way, of what Jesus is saying about Judgment Day. Notice that neither the sheep nor the goats have a clue. Neither of them know what they are. They stand before the Lord, who's on the throne, and both of them, both the sheep and the goats, ask Jesus, when did we see you? Neither of them had a clue. Both verse 37 and 44, both the sheep and the goats are dumbfounded. When did we see you? It's tough not being in control and not knowing, isn't it? It's a tough place to be. We thought faith was all about believing the right things and being the right religion. We imagined that we could position ourselves favorably, kind of like how we used to do confirmation. Did you get enough service points? Now you can be confirmed. Kind of like how we were in that organization and we needed a certain number of badges or points in order to get advanced. I mean, after all, the office where I work did have a food drive. But on that great and terrible day, and Jesus says, neither the sheep nor the goats have a clue. And it's got to be because, on the one hand, maybe the nations of the world just didn't care. Or on the other hand, the members of the nations of the world were so lost in doing what they were doing that was good, that they weren't adding up the points. So, as a congregation, it's very meaningful to watch the path that we're on and the discoveries that we're making, we have more and more people that are getting involved in acts of caring and serving. It was just a few years ago that we learned that churches that have more and more people involved in mission trips are changed. And now we've had at least 20 people go to Oklahoma City or New Orleans, and every year we're just going to try to keep creating opportunities. We've had at least 10 people who have had boots on the ground in El Salvador and have met our partners. We've got dozens of people each fall who do the God's work, Our Hands Day, and are introduced with visits to partners. The youth ministry has been changed. Dave tells me that the kids don't any longer want to go on summer trips just for the sake of the fun of it. They want all their summer trips to involve service. We got this wonderful tradition of the people of the church who personally connect to All People's Church and the Hope Center. The life groups that are beginning to multiply, they take one of their weeks, each one of the cycles that they meet, and they serve. And apparently they take once a month even when they stop meeting, which is wonderful. I met with the council this last week, and I'm still basking in the glow of El Salvador, having been there for 2 weeks, seeing what happens in my spirit when God allows me to walk with people who live on $1 a day. And I was reporting, and I just said to the council, more. You know, it's kind of like that Schindler's List moment. More. More what? More mission trips. More personal connections to El Salvador. More people participating in God's work, Our Hands. More young people growing up with their heart discovering the greatest joy of life, which is to serve somebody. More life groups who do more than simply a food collection for a pantry, but who actually go and walk with people and develop relationships with people in need. And somebody might say, enough already. But no, more. And why? Well, surprise, surprise, it's our greatest joy to be with Jesus. So we come to Holy Week, and right at the prominent point of Holy Week, there's a trial, a courtroom, the Judgment Hall. But this time, near the end of Holy Week, on trial is Jesus, standing alone before the Roman governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. And he's accused of sedition. The Roman government, like governments in every place and time, is nervous about rebellion. And Jesus is accused of claiming that he's a king, which is odd because he's got no army and no power, and yet Pilate says, "Are you a king?" And Jesus says, "I am, but not of this world." And Pilate's like, this guy is Looney Tunes. And so he pronounces his execution. And they put him on the cross, and they hang a sign over the cross that ridicules this sad sack, and it says, King of the Jews, as he hangs there. And he's thirsty. Nobody brings him drink. They torture him by soaking a little plant in some vinegar and hold it up to him. He's unclothed, naked, having been stripped of his only earthly possession, while the soldiers mock him and gamble for his robe. Matthew says none of the disciples visited him in his dying moments. They'd all fled, every one of them apparently a goat. And our judge dies there on the cross and shows us in the last judgment that the viewpoint of life, the idea that life is about victory and success and earned points and qualifying and being declared the winner and positions of honor, are not what God is worried about, but rather God makes his dwelling place among the least. Jesus is not merely in disguise, he is the least of these. So we ask the wrong question if we make Judgment Day about us. We ask the wrong question. It was the same in Roman time. They had this patronage system which said, I do this in order to get that. And the people who were of virtue and good, they did this because they were going to get something out of it. We ask the wrong question if we wonder, which am I? A sheep or a goat? The right question to ask is, how's my neighbor on this planet doing? The neighbor always needs me. And the neighbor is Jesus.